and welcome back to Tech Unfiltered. I'm your host, Ariel. Today we're talking about toxic masculinity with Meta whistleblower Frances Haugen. We have an incredibly in-depth conversation for you about her experience whistleblowing and the push to change these platforms. A little bit about the topic. It's crucial to understand toxic masculinity as an influencer of young people's perspectives, behaviors, and attitudes. Online misogyny has increased at an alarming rate according to American University's Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab. Let's talk about it. In just one day in 2024, the term "get back in the kitchen" trended at 4,600% increase on Platform X. Cynthia Miller-Idris at this lab says it best. And so it's one thing to say, yes, boys and men are isolated and lonely. They're also the victims of bullying and violence at the hands of other men, a culture that valorizes dominance and aggression as sort of hallmarks of masculinity. But to take that crisis of men and masculinity and make it a crisis of misogyny, you really need the online world incubating the kind of hateful rhetoric that we're seeing. What Miller-Idris is saying here is really important. It's not just that the offline world of misogyny influences what happens online, but online toxic masculinity is influencing what happens offline. The Association for Child and Adolescent Mental Health did a study on this too. Here's one of the things that they cite. They say social learning theories predict that individuals who are exposed to extensive misogynistic content will start to internalize the stereotypes, attitudes, and behavioral norms that are common within that sphere. Basically, when we see things around toxic masculinity online, social learning indicators say that we're going to start to internalize that, and that becomes a big problem. Which leads me to one of the big points that I want to make in today's episode. Toxic masculinity and the manosphere echo what happens offline. Essentially, what happens in our online world is a direct reflection of what happens in our offline world. When we leave kids alone online, and particularly our young boys, we are teaching them that the toxic content that they see is the way that they should be living their lives. There are algorithms right now that are preying on our young people. It gives them content that promote clicks and views, but isn't healthy for long-term social and emotional development. Let me break down how the manosphere exists and why it exists so strongly using computer science and what we think we know about algorithms. There are 4 parts. The first part, algorithms collect data. Likes, shares, comments, and they track engagement. They're seeing what's trending, what's popular, regardless of the actual content itself. Second, it analyzes patterns. Think content themes. Who's saying what, and what are they talking about, and who are they talking to? Third, it filters and ranks based on relevance and engagement potential. Basically, it assumes the kind of content that you want to see. And fourth, it personalizes your feed, a tailored stream of videos designed to keep you on the app. When we put these 4 factors together of how algorithms work, it's no wonder why these toxic masculinity and manosphere spaces exist. Controversial and extreme opinions are likely to get attention, and so when you combine that with an algorithm that prioritizes engagement, we see toxic masculinity scale en masse. And since algorithms are designed to show you more of what you already see, that's how we end up in these manufactured echo chambers. And I say manufactured for a reason. They're not echo chambers that naturally exist. They exist because someone made a decision about an algorithm to keep you online for longer. Frances and I talk about this message, but I want to say it clearly here. Just because you see your favorite influencer telling you how to treat others, that doesn't mean that it's real. Just because you see that influencer getting engagement and getting thousands upon millions of likes and views, that doesn't mean that it's real. This isn't how masculinity is supposed to be. It's how big tech is trying to make you feel. Unfortunately, big tech's algorithms see our young people who are maybe struggling, maybe socially isolated, maybe looking for answers online, and preys on that. A lot of the time, people who end up in these manosphere rabbit holes weren't even looking for it. Maybe they were looking for workout videos, health plans, or just advice on how to talk to their peers. But when social media prioritizes the things that get clicks, that's how we end up here. It's not because so many people are looking for this kind of content, it's because this is the kind of content that keeps you online for longer. But it doesn't have to be this way. The bigger issue is that this has been a hidden problem for far too long. Despite gaining international attention and acknowledgement, the manosphere persists. Just one example on how young people experience unique pressure because of online spaces in our daily lives. Here to talk about toxic masculinity, blowing the whistle on Meta, and so much more, Frances Haugen.
Hi, all. Welcome back to Tech Unfiltered. I am with the phenomenal Frances Haugen today. We are going to be talking about young people, technology, and answering more of your questions of why it feels so stressful to be online sometimes. Frances, I would love for you to give a little introduction to yourself and some background about what brings you here.
My name's Frances. People usually know me as, quote, the Facebook whistleblower, though there are hundreds of Facebook whistleblowers. But the reason why I often get the appended onto my name is I brought forward about 20,000 pages of documents back in 2021, and it kicked off a whole series of things. So the class action lawsuit today was able to get standing to get more documents because they could point at some of the documents that came out. Or, the European Union has credited like getting the documents helped them pass the Digital Services Act, which was like the first big piece of regulation that said, hey, we have the right to ask you questions and force you to give us answers. So I've since then been working on, helping people understand how do these systems work? And most importantly, understand that there's lots of ways to improve them. And that if we just had richer conversations about how we want to go forward, there's unquestionably a common ground that we'd all be comfortable about for moving into the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So let's talk basic, right? What were you seeing and why was it important to start talking about that?
So I worked within something called civic integrity. And civic integrity's intention was Facebook up until then had really had a culture of what are known as high prevalence problems. Like they cared the most about things that impacted the most people. They didn't really have a concept of severity. The idea that, for example, someone who commits self-harm is in a qualitative way different than someone who receives spam. So yes, there's a lot more spam than people who harm themselves. But one might say we would accept more spam in the world for fewer people who harm themselves. So civic integrity came around to say, hey, we know that we are playing a role in elections. We know that there are foreign influence operations that are targeting, say, the United States, targeting other countries. We know there are these things that are not super prevalent, but they are incredibly severe. And Facebook spent 4 years building out that team. With less than a month after the 2020 election, they dissolved the team. And that was the moment when I realized, like, I had not believed that we were working fast enough or hard enough or putting enough resources in up to that point, but we were trying, like we were making progress. And when they dissolved the team, it became very clear to me that the only way Facebook could be saved was if other people came to help. And so that's how I was set on my course to becoming a whistleblower.
That sentence, right? The only way that Facebook can be saved is if other people come to help. It, to us feels really at the core of how we view this work, right? Which is that we have seen time and time again that big tech has no ability to regulate itself. And so we as young people are coming in with solutions, with ideas of ways that we can make. And that's a lot of what we're talking about on this series, right? Like, how can we use the smartness of young people and how much we know these platforms and care about maintaining their health to make them better. We're not anti-social media, we're not anti-tech.
Yeah.
We're trying to make it better and improve it. So talk to me, right? The job of this civics team is to look at these online harms. What online harms were you seeing?
Facebook knew that they were influencing political discourse. They had interviewed politicians that were saying we run different positions than we did a few years ago because that's what can spread on social media. Like we know we have to play to the rage in a way that we didn't have to before. And the fact that Facebook knew all those things, that they had run many experiments showing that the algorithm pushed people towards more extreme things. I felt like the only way the public could protect themselves was if they had that information.
And that choice, right? That public has to protect ourselves is huge. I can't imagine what that was like for you to make. One of the things that we care really strongly about is choice in digital spaces, right? And when I talk about choice, it's the choice to use, right? The choice to use different social media platforms, right? To be online. A lot of the people who watch, this content enjoy being online, right? Like, like at the end of the day, scrolling, like seeing different things, cooking videos. But one of the things that we really emphasize is the decision to choose what we do and we don't see, right? So sometimes it looks like seeing harmful content or not seeing harmful content. But also sometimes it looks like things in our settings, right? What kind of data are these platforms collecting on us? Do I have the choice to toggle that on versus off? And so when we talk about choice in these platforms, that's huge. Yeah, go ahead.
The one of the things that has been incredibly heartening for me is like the big thing I've been pushing for a couple of years. Like when people ask me like, what's what are small, like I have big policy dreams, but I have small policy dreams too. You know, people should have a right to reset their algorithms. Right.
Yeah.
You should have the right to reset, because the thing I've heard over and over again from like therapists who work with kids who have eating disorders, people who are struggling with various issues driven by social media, maybe depressive thoughts, is they say, I'm trying to make different decisions in my life. I'm like doing all the right things. And then I open Instagram and it follows me. And without a right to reset, we force people to choose between their past and their future. Right. And that's, I think, a really inhumane thing. And just a month or two ago, Facebook rolled out for the first time. You're right. It's buried in the settings, but they did roll out the right to reset your algorithm on Instagram. And so these things where we're fighting or we're putting pressure on, we're drawing attention, these things all change the frame of reference of what's acceptable. And it really does change the behavior of these companies. It just takes time.
Yeah. So you just mentioned, you have kind of small policy dreams, big policy dreams. Talk to me about some of those.
So, it's interesting. Like, I think small, medium, large. Small things are things like the right to reset.
Right.
Medium, and this maybe even is just small, is, what if we took a step back? Like my big dreams are things like we should have research access to these platforms, right? We should have the right to run experiments on these platforms. That's kind of my, you have to have a dream that you aim at, right?
Right.
And what if we pared that down and we said, every platform needs to publish 5 metrics. And we'll start with kids, because it seems we argue less about kids. So we're going to poll 10,000 kids each month, 20,000 kids each month on the platform in the United States. And we're going to ask, does this platform interfere with your ability to go to sleep at night? Do you feel like you can control your usage of this platform? That's the consent issue. And have you received an unwanted sexual message in the last 7 days? And does this negatively impact your schoolwork or your health? Does this help you connect with people in your physical life? Because right now, the way these businesses are operated is, if they steal from any of those categories, they make your life worse by keeping you up really late at night, making it so that you can't feel like you can regulate how much usage, separate you from your in-person friends. All those things actually drive up their business metrics. They look like success. And so until we have the right to have those things published on every platform, we can't really choose between what we use, right? And I think the thing that was exciting about what you were talking about is like reminding people they have choices. One of my moderate-sized dreams is I really want to figure out a toolkit where a school can say, hey, we're going to go through a process over 3 months, and we're going to decide where we want our community to spend our time. Like, we're going to activate the students and have them, for example, go read the FTC documents that the federal government just published, like as part of the antitrust trial. Like, they're wild. Things like Facebook is known for 5 years that tons and tons of like strangers are sending lewd photos to children, which is a crime.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they knew about it, and when they went in and looked into it, they said things like, how did this happen? Why would 35% of the people we recommend to people we've already seen are creepers? Like, we have a flag or something, we know these people are groomers in our little thing. Yeah. We haven't kicked them off for some reason. Why are 35% of those recommendations children? And they wrote in the document, system working as intended, because the groomers had found children who were posting racy photos or were vulnerable in some way, and then found them other children who were like those children. Wild.
System working as intended is wild. And that to hear that is so physically I feel
Oh
it like,
yeah. Oh yeah.
oh my
And
God.
it got basically no press coverage. That's part of why I'm like ranting about it
Mm.
today. Is
Well,
like
yeah.
Bloomberg covered it
Mhm.
and we're thinking about actually starting to do YouTube videos because we're so
Mm.
angry about like how these documents are just like falling on dry soil.
Yeah.
Because we think people would
And
want to know. So
yeah, and part of it, right, is like empowering young people to have that knowledge. One of the things that you were just talking about, right? These business metrics can make it look like these companies are really successful and that they're doing really great. But one of the things that we see kind of on the other side is the human impact of it, right? Which are like
mm-hmm.
young people who are these business metrics, right? So time spent on the app, ad revenue, purchase, right? Like that's like a young person being like, "Hey mom, like can I have your credit card to buy this thing? This like, beauty product that I'm seeing online because my favorite influencer told me that this would impact, my physical appearance in these ways." Like that's that's us, right? Like that's our generation. And it feels really uncomfortable, right? To be on these platforms that sure we can get community from, but also we know that they're really meticulously taking advantage of our psyche, right? Like our feelings, we get a ton of content, we get a ton of ads. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? How old are you?
23.
23. Okay. So I really think it's incredibly important for like 19 to 23-year-olds to go into middle schools right now. Because the thing that I
Mm.
find wild is when I walk into many middle schools, so it's not all the girls look identical. They all have the same perfectly contoured makeup. They all are just like, they have Instagram filter faces.
Yep.
And that is not normal. And I don't think it's healthy, right? Because you only put in that level of effort if you feel like you are not adequate, like you're not enough.
Mm.
And I remember being 12 years old and I thought high school seniors were gods, right? Like
Yep.
let's just acknowledge this. You as a 23-year-old are a god to a 14-year-old. Like they want to be just like you when they grow up. But the thing though is like your generation, like your little slice mini generation, you didn't do that, at least not to the same
Mm.
extent. I think it's a very different impact for having young adults go and talk to middle schoolers or do interventions in middle schools because I think kids are really suffering right now. And
Mm.
it's a very different experience than what even people 10 years older. You get a certain level of social pressure from spending
Mm.
15 minutes with a single influencer who's doing makeup. You get a very different feeling of normalization when you sit there
Mm.
on a TikTok feed and you consume 20 videos in, 20 minutes, 20 videos in 10 minutes, and you see 20 different people who all are engaging in those behaviors. And I think that's where the pressure comes from. And when people talk about what is impacting our lives, like what's shaping what we're feeling, like why are we anxious? I think it's not just the algorithms pushing us towards more extreme content. It's questions around form factor. So, for
Mm.
example, I went through a period of time where I was feeling more stress. I don't know exactly when in the past year. And I made a conscious choice that for like 3 days, every time I had a break in my day, I wasn't going to watch YouTube. I was going to
Mm.
watch some Netflix series. And it's fascinating. Like, we take for granted what the mental load is of deciding, am I going to continue watching this YouTube video? Or which video will I watch next? Versus having a piece of longer form content where you are continuing to engage in a single narrative. And that changes what you feel. I could feel my anxiety levels go down. And so the question is,
Really?
what does like single minute long videos do? Right?
Right. Right. Well, I mean that for anxiety, but also for attention span. I feel like
Totally.
over time, the more short
Mm-hmm.
form content that I watch, my attention span is significantly decreased. Not that it was ever great to begin with, but like the amount of time, like I feel myself getting anxious and like needing a next thing very frequently the more that I do short form content. And it's so funny. I was hanging out with a friend who doesn't have any social media, doesn't use social media, and he was waiting on me for something. And he just sat there and waited. And I was like, I've never I was like, "What are you doing?" He's just sitting there and waiting. And I was like, "Oh, I would be like scrolling on my phone." He's like, "Yeah, I have a great attention span because I'm not watching like 45-second dopamine slot machine videos. Like, I just kind of am waiting a few minutes and thinking, and then I'll see you in a second. Like, that concept was wild to me, which is so bad because the ability to sit and think is like so human.
And I think like one of the things that, I think we one of the things that I feel guilty about is, and I want to be clear, like part of why I can be compassionate to the people who work at Meta, like so Facebook,
Mhm.
Instagram, is, almost no one who works at that company has a child who's old enough to actually use the product, right? Like the oldest child of Mark Zuckerberg is 8 or 9, same age as Adam Mosseri, who's the head of Instagram. People have kids a little bit older in Silicon Valley, and these people founded these companies when they were like 19. And I never thought about the impact of any things on kids, right? I might have thought
Mm,
of the impacts on boomers because I was like, oh, those boomers trashed by social media.
yeah.
But when you don't live in a world that has any kids in it, you just don't think of the impact on it. And I think it's just one of these things where part of why I keep emphasizing, like, hey, if you in the audience, or if you're 18, if you're 19, if you're 20, if you are looking for a way to give back, or you're looking for a way to feel like you have some agency, we really need people going into elementary schools and in middle schools and talking to kids,
Mhm.
because all those things that you're talking about stealing the opportunity to sit with stillness, like, I find it really shocking watching the videos on YouTube of teachers who say, I've taught for 20 years. I've used the same curriculum, the same kinds of things for 20 years, and the kids can't do it now. Like they come in, and because they can't be on their phone, these are 12-year-olds, because they can't be on their phone, they sit there like, that for
Yeah.
6 hours till they can go back. And if we want to have a future, we have to, as a community, invest in figuring out how to help the people who are suffering the most.
Yeah. Talk to me about what that looks like, right? Like, we go into
Mhm.
elementary and middle schools and we see young people having these reactions. What can, teens, like adolescents, young adults be doing and thinking about in our own lives to help influence that?
I think one of the things we need to do, and this is like, I think one of the most powerful things Design for Us can do, is, there's not 2 or 3 social media platforms. There's like 20 social media platforms, and a bunch of them are smaller. They have smaller audiences. But like, if you were actually to go and inventory them and say, which of these platforms works best if, let's say, you brought over a middle school.
Hmm.
Like, let's say you go in there and you have the middle schoolers present the Facebook documents to the other middle schoolers. Maybe you do like a mock trial, and some of the students get to prosecute the company, right? And the other people get to try to defend it. I don't know. Like, we have to think creatively about, like, how do you make that
Right.
access? But like, when young people read what these executives are saying about them, or like the choices that were made and how that shapes their lives, like, they get angry. And being
Mm,
able to say, like, hey, we're not saying we don't want you to live online. Like, I'm not a prohibitionist, right? There's certain activists out there
right.
who are like, oh, Frances wants to be on social media. Like, I'm not a prohibitionist. I'm just like, hey, like, I have not seen any evidence from these companies that they actually want to make their products mildly appropriate for kids.
Right.
And so I think one of the things where, young adults, like, 20-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds can really make a difference is even going in and just having structured conversations with kids. Because right now you have 11-year-olds getting lewd photos from strangers who don't know what you do once you receive a lewd photo from a stranger.
Yeah.
They
Right.
think it's normal.
Right. Because it has become normalized. And
Yep.
one of the things when we talk about this that I often say, right, is like, if we allowed what happens in our digital world to happen right next to a playground where we know young people inherently are, there would be
Yeah.
the outrage. There
Outrage.
would be outrage. Parents in city halls and young people and like and companies taking responsibility first and foremost. And
Forcing
it's really
responsibility. The advertisers would come after them.
right. Right. Because there would be a social lack of the current social contract would be broken, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
that it's currently acceptable for that to happen. So kind of pivoting a little bit, one of the things that I'm thinking about in terms of being online is kind of the way that toxic masculinity is
Ooh.
affecting our young
Mm-hmm.
people. And I mean, just like automatically like hearing a reaction, talk to me about what you are thinking when you hear those words together.
Yeah, I think it's one of these things where it's a combination of factors, right? Like I'm always careful to say like social media does X. It's more like
Right.
social media amplifies things that are already happening and worsens them. So, for example, the way young boys or young men figured out how to be adult men was they interacted with men, right?
Mm.
Like we had more social institutions where you have like you go bowling with your dad and his buddies, you whatever. I don't know what guys used to do. You go hunting, you go camping, you
Yeah.
do stuff together. And a world in which we don't have like where adult men don't have as many friends, you
Mm.
know, they don't get to model being men with men. And it's one of these things where we live in a really complicated world where like things are changing, right? You had a
Mm.
system where women were completely financially dependent on men. You
Mm.
didn't, if you left your kids too, like really high stakes. And we haven't really seen an affirmative force of men coming out there and kind of being the antipode, like the other side, right? We see
Mm.
we see the Andrew Tates of the world, but we don't see what is that other more affirmative form of
Mm.
masculinity. And when you leave kids alone online and they are struggling with like how do I exist, I think it's really dangerous. I think the situation with video games, similar. Like as much as we talk about social media, video games keep kids from sleeping. They keep kids from showing up and being able to do their best in school. And if you went to school every day and got told you were doing badly and you couldn't figure out what your future was, you would be a really vulnerable target for these algorithms. And I think that's a big
Right.
part of what drives the problem.
Right. Right. And, part of that is creating like a larger, stronger ecosystem for our young people, right? Which is that,
Mm-hmm.
um, like you're right. You go to school, you're not doing well in school, but you know where you are doing well in this game with your friends. And so I think it while it doesn't create these issues, it kind of harbors some of them, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm not doing great in math. I am doing great in this video game. I'm going to go be great at that because young people, right, at the end of the day, want to feel good about ourselves, right? We want like
Mm-hmm.
social validation. And it's hard. It's really hard without that. So, as we think about, not just social media, but also video games, talk to me about why it's important that these platforms take responsibility for the content on their site, right? We talk a lot
Mm.
about what happens and, how can we design this to be better? But some of the things that I talk with young people about is that it's not just us who need to be making these decisions, it's these companies too. So talk to me about why it's important that these companies take responsibility for what's happening and not just the content, but also the design itself.
So, before we were talking about this idea of like, what does it mean to watch a short form video versus watch a long piece of context, maybe a multi episode series? What is that difference? Like, how does it make you feel? Like, what comes of that? When you watch a multi part series, some group of humans spend a huge amount of time deciding exactly what you are going to experience over time. Versus if you
Mhm.
watch a long string of short form videos, the thing that is shaping that experience of that 3 hours, that 4 hours, is an algorithm, right?
Mm.
People have lost control, and your attention is now directed by a computer. And I think the place that we are not in right now is if platforms were required. We were talking before, like what are my small goals? What are my big goals? One
Mm.
of my, let's call it a moderate goal, is every piece of content that gets seen by more than 10,000 people should be in a public archive, right? We should be able to see how many
Mm.
people saw it, maybe even
Oh, I love
segment
that.
it, right? Like maybe even segmented by age. Say, this piece of content got seen by 100,000 people. Here's a histogram of how old people were that watched it. Because it's one of these things where if they had even that tiny amount of transparency, their advertisers would come in and say, why the hell is it that X content gets so much more views than that content?
Young people have the right to know, right? We should have
Mm-hmm.
this right to agency. And that's one of the things that we talk a lot about at Design It For Us. One of the things that we did this past fall, we went on our campus tour, right, which you were a part of.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we went to different college campuses to talk to other young people about, what are you seeing online? Why does it feel difficult to be online? And start to open up these conversations and this research. Because one of the things, just to your point about researching, getting this information, one of the things that we really value is young people kind of showing up in our own right. And this campus tour was a way
Mm.
for us to kind of take back some of this research that's been done about us without us, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about researching young people, there are think tanks, there are entities, there are researchers, there are these tech platforms that are doing a ton of research on us. And I think for us, it's empowering to say, here's the research that we're going to do on ourselves, right? Here are the questions we're going to ask ourselves and each other, and the things that we're going to start to think about, which impact our daily lives. It impacts how we think, it impacts how we talk, it impacts the decisions we make and the ways that we see the world. So that's huge. Um
Were you guys
I
the ones
think
that did the study that came out recently where they went in and like were looking at like what content was recommended in the teen accounts? I'm
yep.
trying to remember.
We had 5 members of Design It For Us
Mm-hmm.
create Instagram teen accounts to really see, what is safe for teens. And we found, unfortunately, what you would expect: sexualized content, drug use, alcohol use. And, Instagram has touted that these accounts are safe for teenagers with these controls. And we found that they're categorically not. When we were, when we decided to expose this, to have this conversation, Meta just continuously denied any wrongdoing, right? And called our entire study flawed. And so that's at the core of it, right? When we talk about young people and taking control and ownership of these digital spaces, it's also about having the right to know what's happening to us and the ways in which we're
Mm-hmm.
being tested. So what I want to do in our last few minutes together, I want to open it up to you, right? What haven't I asked you? What haven't I, talked to you about?
I think there's a huge opportunity for giving more attention to alternative social media. So
Mm,
like I have not done this inventory. Again, this is one of these projects that I would love to do with you guys because like you're gonna have a different set of awareness than I'm gonna have. And is I learned about blue fever a couple years ago. I don't know if it's still
mhm.
popular. Is it still popular? Yeah. Like it was really popular a couple years ago. I don't know if it still is. And it's a great example of we can have different ways of connecting online. Right. Or like, I don't know, is Thursday still popular at all? Or is that a thing? There's like a dating app where it only works one day a week. So
Ooh,
the
I've
question
never
is
heard
like,
of that.
and this
That's
is a
cool.
this is a great example of like design. Like we can make design choices. We can have different experiences because of these choices. They said if you had to choose between dating someone who has time to swipe 7 days a week and someone who's like, oh no, 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 I don't have the time for this. I will swipe one day a week, Wednesday evening. And I will, and I'll, whoever I'm going to go on a date with, that's who I'm going to go on a date with. And so you can only get recommendations on Wednesday evening. And the idea is you should go on a date on Thursday. And it's these things where, like, having a directory, like having an inventory of saying, like, hey, these things exist. It makes it easier then for a middle school to go in there and say, hey, we are making a different choice. Like we're going to keep connecting. We're not saying we don't want people connecting online, but we are going to make conscious choices about where we're going to go and how we're going to spend that time. We have been distracted by the content moderation debate for too long. And the place
Hmm.
that we should be putting pressure on is how do we make choices about these spaces? Just like if you were to build a building that we were going to interact in, you would make choices about the flooring and the ceiling and the walls because some things cause echoes and some things make you feel anxious and some things feel cozy. What would it mean to live on a cozy internet? The thing I always leave people with is this idea that we have really good psychological research that people are more able to solve problems when they believe it is possible to solve a problem. When they're like, oh yeah, there is a solution out there, I just haven't found it yet. People are think more creatively. They see the possibilities when they encounter them than if you believe there's no hope. And so I always encourage people to just there are things in this world that are unprovable, but how you think about them literally changes everything else. For example, if you assume people are generally good or if you assume people are generally bad, it will color every moment of your day. Because if you think people are generally bad, you'll be defensive. You'll think hostilely. If you think people are good, you'll be more open and collaborative. That's a thing you can't prove. But similarly, are we going to improve? Can we build social media that we feel safe and cozy on? If you believe it can be done, we will figure out how to make it so. So that is the thing I leave you with.
That is beautiful. What a phenomenal way to close this out. Frances, thank you so much for taking the time. And if people want to learn more about your work, connect with you more, where can they go?
They can go to my website. We're probably going to start a newsletter. So there's a
Awesome.
form where you can fill it out. I am on Twitter. I haven't tweeted a lot lately, and I am on Instagram.
Amazing. Awesome. Frances, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for watching this incredibly important episode of Tech Unfiltered. We'll see you next time.